Good evening, everyone. I apologize for the delay. There was some technical problem that we were taking care of, and unfortunately, I was also involved and I was busy, so that's why I couldn't come in even to say sorry for the delay, but please accept my sincere apologies for not starting on time because of this problem that we were facing. But first of all, thank you very much for joining us here tonight, and I really appreciate the time and the effort that you made to come and join this fantastic event, Mapping East-West Through Writing. As we always say in Urdu, Assalamu alaikum. So anyone who understands, it's may blessing be upon you. And good evening, as I've always said. We've got some guests here as well, and I would like to invite them at some point. But before I invite anyone, I would like to explain a little bit about the idea behind this event that we have organized tonight. Basically, what we are gathered here is to celebrate the remarkable power of literature and cultural diplomacy. I'm a very strong advocate of cultural diplomacy, and for me, it's a channel that can be used and should be used not only for the hardcore diplomacy, but also as a soft power of interpreting any culture through means of literature, fashion, music, architecture, and any other soft measures that we can take. As a founder and CEO of ISP Events, we have been organizing events for past 23 years. And this is first in the series of many that will come. And the same idea will prevail, that how to map East and West, whether it's Britain, whether it's Eastern European, whether it's Western European and Asian countries or South Asia. Predominantly we are talking about tonight is one of the leading British authors, very famous British authors, and Pakistani author that we have amongst us. And we would like to obviously at one point come on stage and, you know, carry on with the event. But the concept of this particular event that we have tonight is to endorse the idea of how this literature that we are talking about today is helping in mapping East and West together. So we firmly believe in the immense power of culture and the ability of cultural diplomacy to shape the international dialogue. And that's one of the dialogues that we are having today. British author, Pakistani author, having dialogues, reading their poetry, and talking about their experiences they will share with us soon. So basically, the idea is to showcase the rich tapestry of creativity that can be found across different genres of culture and the activities that we perform. Although event management is at the core of ISP Events, but I would like to let you know that we, particularly ISP Events, hold a deep sense of responsibility towards addressing the prevailing issues of conflict, intolerances, and that persist throughout the world. So it is a firm belief that the beauty of artistic creation has the potential to transcend boundaries and unite us all from various channels that I have already spoken with you. I would like to say a few thanks to those who have been part of this fantastic event and helped us, supported us throughout the journey. So I'm deeply grateful to the Arkan University Institute for the Study of Muslim Civilization and the Dean Professor Leif Stenberg. Unfortunately, he's not in today because he has to travel and go abroad, but his representation is done by one of his colleagues, which I'm going to call upon on stage soon, for the support throughout they have provided us to make this event possible. And we would also like to extend our gratitude to our media partner, AIY Digital, which is one of the leading South Asian TV channels. And we also like to thank my Romania community who are here recording tonight's event, also broadcasting it live on their YouTube channel, which I'm sure I'll share the link at some point, and you can watch it at your spare time. We also like to thank Mr. Suhail Zarar from Buzz Masokan, Yusuf Abraham from London Voice, and Mr. Naseem Mir, who's a photographer taking lovely photos of all of you tonight, and JS Graphics, who helped us throughout the journey. But before I would proceed with the main event, I would like to invite a gentleman on stage who's, as I said, representing the Arkan University at this moment because Mr. Leif Stenberg is not available tonight. So his name is Professor Jonas Otterberg, and he's basically representing the university. His work centers on creativity, aesthetics, and ethics in relation to Islam, especially amongst English-speaking Muslims. So please put your hand together for Professor Jonas Otterberg. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome everybody to this lovely building, the Aga Khan Center, where I work. You're envious. So, as said, my name is Jonas Otterberg. I'm from Sweden, but I moved here in 2018 to work at the Institute of the Study of Muslim Civilizations, which is a part of the Aga Khan University. It's founded 20 years ago to address issues about humanities and, well, social change in the present. So it's a humanistic and social science endeavor, a research institute, but with a little master's education. We also have an outreach program, and I'm now going to direct your gaze to that table over there, where there's a little sign with a QR code. So if you scan that when you pass it, you will find our program, and you can also sign up if you want to hear about the program more or be invited to future events. Last week, for example, we had an event on Uyghur music and censorship and China. There's also, for the few who make it to the table first, a little green thing. It's actually a USB stick with 14 open access books that we give away. So please grab one if you feel like it. My role is also to say that if you accidentally put fire to the building, we all have to move out, and we go out in the atrium and then down the stairs, and we gather in that side of the building, okay? Then you call your insurance agent. If there's other things that you need to mitigate, other kinds of emergencies, toilets are in that direction. So the Aga Khan University is a rather weird thing. How many have heard of it? Raise your hand. Okay, a fair amount. Most of you would probably then associate it as a health university, because it is. It runs research hospitals in Tanzania, in Kenya, in Uganda, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, for example. It's spread out over 3 continents, and this is the only part that is in London, and actually the only part, apart from a little emerging budding thing in Lisbon, that is in Europe. It's been around for 40 years. We've been around for 20, so it's rather new university, but it's achieved quite a lot. For example, Aga Khan universities were the first one to introduce breast cancer screening in East Africa. Not a bad achievement. Now, I'm here also to address a few things related to this event and to my research. So I decided to say a few words about creativity. And creativity has an interesting history, especially when you look at it from a researcher's point of view. Quite a number of us researchers, we get a bit provoked by the romantic notion of creativity as setting people free. You're unattached and you create from your mind. Rather, we would like to see how, and this is clear to everyone who works with words, how we're all tied to traditions, to genres. What I say right now would be incomprehensible if you hadn't learned English before. That's a heritage. So we all build on the past. We all sort of use traditions, use genres to enable us to speak, to enable us to be creative, to enable us to dance and write, for example. But nothing says that we are bound by it. We can tweak it. We can nurture it. We can love the heritage. We can do whatever we like, but we cannot escape it. We'll be acting in relation to it. They are there. I would also say that the more we know about heritage, not necessarily what some people will call our own heritage, but other people's heritage, what I would say human heritage, what they did in the pharaonic times, what happened in in the Sassanid empires, what happened in Russia in the 17th century, what's happening now in Karachi art scene. We can all sort of try to relate to it in different ways from different positionalities, and it only makes our perception richer. Now, in its most productive guise, the discourse and the discussions about decolonialization is about exploring and increasing our understanding of human creativity and thought, and not just barring it, sort of making it small around our own cultures, or very often then around Western culture, whatever that means exactly, British, North American culture, but expanding it, thinking creatively in relation to other heritage and respecting that, acknowledging it without sort of appropriating it in a bad way, but putting ourselves in dialogue. So I really, really look forward to the event today, because we are going to get fantastic examples of this in literature and in dance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonas, for your insight about your work and about the university itself. While I was thanking everyone, I forgot to thank the entire team of Arkan Center, who have been extremely helpful and supportive throughout. And even when we had some last-minute glitches or some technical issues, they were always there to support us. So I would like you to please put your hands together for Robin, for Chilla, and for Ian, helping us together. Please put your hands together. They're outside, but they did a really, really hard work and immense job. Okay, I would like to call upon another guest, and we are really honored to be here, and we're really thankful for, because it was a last-minute confirmation, and we are thankful that he's here. He's the Director of Arts at the British Council, and his responsibilities involving international cultural relations through art, culture, heritage, and creative enterprise. He has a long history of international collaborations, coupled with an outstanding commitment to inclusion and diversity. He's leading British Council's global arts work, supporting and sustaining virtual cultural connections between the UK artists and organizations and their counterparts worldwide. I would like to call him on stage. Please put your hands together for Director of Arts at the British Council, Skander Hondel.
Thank you, Faisal, for my very dramatic introduction. Well, firstly, respects to the Aga Khan Center and the Ismaili community who do these great things. It's really, really, truly a blessing to be here. And I actually got invited by one of the artists here today, who you'll be performing, a wonderful artist called Wahab Shah, who's a Sufi dancer of extraordinary talent, very mystical qualities, who I have championed in my previous role. It occurred to me as I was walking here, I heard the hustle and bustle of a big queue, and I thought I'd reached the Aga Khan Center. I thought, wow, what a queue. But the queue was for this place called Dashum. So I went in, and I went to find out about Dashum, because they'd sponsored one of my festivals in the past with a great artist called Shomik Dutta. So I wanted to see what it was all about, the London offer, because it's in Birmingham, it's in Manchester. I'm from Birmingham. So I went in, and as I looked around, I saw such a diverse community from different cultures, all chomping away, happy as Larry, with such delicious food. And it then occurred to me that, you know, food, gastronomy, culture, and design and the aesthetic of space and place really does bring us together, as this does tonight. We're going to hear from authors. And the work I do is very much about the idea of building peace and shared prosperity across the world by building trust and relations. There's a great artist called Ustad Bahauddin Dagga once said to me, he's a 13th century tradition from the Mughal courts, who plays Rudravina, said to me, when he collaborates with another artist, he said you can only share your deeper thought if you sense trust and chemistry between people. And it is very true. You build relations through trust. And that is the work of British Council. And our arts programme is quite extensive. But I won't go into that detail today. It's too much. And as I entered here, I heard the poetry of Qawwali. And Qawwali is a great example of East and West connection. If you think about the great maestro, Ustad Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan Sahab, who was championed by a wonderful friend of mine called Mohammed Ayub in Birmingham in the Oriental Star Agency back in the day. Is my father's generation. But I was listening and I was always watching and I was always inspired by the music of Pakistan and Qawwali in particular, because it had three meanings, but I won't go into those meanings because those meanings are a little mischievous sometimes. As much as this is about Khuda and Rab, it is also about many other things of our existence. And that's the beauty of art and culture, that the continuum between 0 and 1 is multiple ripple factorials of trillions of variations. And this is what is so amazing about art and culture, because it enters that subjective spaces of genuine truths that are very personalized. And so today we're going to hear from these great authors. We're going to see the great Wahab Shah and Faisal, ISP. You're doing such a great job in your cultural diplomacy and soft power, as you said, by bringing us together, all together. So without further ado, I think we should proceed with the writers, unless there's more speeches. Yeah, please, because we got the deputy. I thought it was you. Hello. And we did do a wonderful season with Pakistan and UK with the Deputy Commission was there and present, and the High Commission of Pakistan were very favourable and worked very hard with us to put on a really good spectacle. And the legacy of that initiative is continuing today. I will finish at this moment. Thank you very much. Enjoy the evening.
Thank you very much, Skander. And just trust me, just one more, and then we'll continue with the event, because I personally requested this gentleman, and he has taken his time out to join us tonight from Pakistan High Commission. He's the Deputy, His Excellency, the Deputy High Commissioner of Pakistan, Dr. Faisal Aziz Ahmed. Just to give him a little introduction, he has been great support and patron of cultural exchange, and very kind as to be here with us tonight. So without a further explanation or introduction, I would let the words talking, because he has been great support for art and culture, especially this idea of mapping East-West and soft power of culture and cultural diplomacy. So I would like to call upon His Excellency, the Deputy High Commissioner of Pakistan High Commission, London, Dr. Faisal Aziz Ahmed, to come on stage and please say a few words. Thank you. Put your hands together.
Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. Faisal Shaukat Saab, colleague from British Council. It's a great pleasure for me to be here and to listen to some great names. I'm very excited to hear what you have to say. Pakistan, as you all know, has an amazing cultural heritage. Pakistan is very, very eclectic. It's the place where a lot of world religions, not just Islam, but also, I believe, Buddhism and other religions were born, and ideas germinated, and every 50 kilometers, whichever way you go in Pakistan, you find a different culture, a variation, a diversity, and that diversity, if you go deeper through literature, through culture, through arts, speaks to you. It speaks to some deeper truths. We in diplomacy tend to look at the world, unfortunately, maybe in terms of black and white, and the world is not black and white. It's so many shades of gray. So I'm not going to take more of your time. We have had an excellent partnership with the British Council, and the one thing that we do want to celebrate and continue doing with the British Council is to celebrate this immense unity in diversity. The British Pakistani diaspora, you are now 1.6 million, some 2.5% of the UK's population. You are more British than Pakistani perhaps, but there's a lot of Pakistan inside of you. You cannot take Pakistan away from your hearts. And that is something that I've seen with experience. Your experiences, the way your outlook, the way you imbibe the East and the West and combine them together inside you is something really, really amazing. So with these few words, I look forward to listening to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Faisal Aziz. Now, without further ado, I would like to call upon a person who has been instrumental in putting this event together from scratch until today. And we are fortunate that she was so keen to do this event with us and agreeing with our philosophy of this cultural diplomacy. Herself used to be the proper, I could call like a diplomat, because she was a cultural diplomat, cultural attaché, cultural project manager at the Romanian Cultural Institutes for 7 years and did some amazing events together. I would like to just explain a few words, so at least I would like to appreciate her presence tonight. She's a creative producer, published author, and a translator. She holds a doctoral degree in cultural studies, philology, and lectures in English for business and intercultural communication at the Babish Bolyai University Faculty of Economics and Business Administration in Cluj-Napoca. She has been recognized as a strong advocate of cultural diplomacy. As I just mentioned, that she has served as a cultural manager, project manager at the Romanian Cultural Institute, and her successful track record as creative producer in cultural management includes award-winning exhibition, including London Fashion Week, groundbreaking literary events, and numerous other projects developed across borders and art forms. She was instrumental in organizing and launching the first ever Romanian British Literature Festival in the UK, which is called Romania Rocks. And that same year, she guest edited the Romanian Revista magazine, the first issue of British literary magazine dedicated entirely to Romania. But this is so beautiful that, you know, we have cultural ambassador or cultural representation from other countries, and we are trying to voice together with the same message of mapping different cultures together. So I would like you to please put your hands together for Dr. Gabriela Mocan.
Thank you, Faisal, for the too flattering introduction. And I'm very happy to see all of you here tonight. I'm very honored and very, very happy to be joined by two wonderful authors whose literary brilliance and two latest books we are celebrating tonight. For those of you who don't know them yet, our esteemed guests are writers of a remarkable versatility, and I dare to call them true architects of worlds. Fiona Sampson is a widely translated and acclaimed poet and biographer. She is also an emeritus professor of poetry at the Roehampton University, a critic and a broadcaster, so many hats, and I can go on, whose impressive list of awards and fellowship has brought her an MBA for services to literature in 2017. Following two of her more recent titles, In Search of Mary Shelley and multiple award-winning A Two-Way Mirror, The Life of Elizabeth Barrett Browning, the book that we are talking about tonight, Starlight Wood, that you will all see outside and you will be able to get a copy of with a signature from the author herself, is in fact the third in this series of biographies dedicated to the Romantic period. But as you will discover later, it is much more than a simple biography. joining her tonight here on stage is Shazea Quraishi, a wonderful, wonderful poet of extreme sensitivity that you will have the pleasure of discovering. And besides being a poet, Shazea is also a wonderful translator, as well as a poetry tutor. I've been thinking about possibly signing up for some classes in the future. And an editor whose rich cultural background that you will find out more about later, as well as amazing multilingualism inform and pervade her work. The Glimmer, the book that we are celebrating tonight, published by Bloodaxe last year, sits alongside other much valued, much appreciated volumes of poetry, like The Art of Scratching or The Courtesan's Reply. Her writing often delves into themes of identity, love, death, and the reader will always discover a very powerful narrator. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming on stage Fiona, Sampson, and Shazea Quraishi. Okay, so we are talking, as I said, we are talking tonight about East and West, and we are celebrating this union of cultures through two wonderful volumes that we are launching. Both of them that appeared last year through, I would say, not a coincidence, it was meant to be. Starlight Wood published last year in hardback format, yes, but this year in September in paperback format, and The Glimmer published last year, as I mentioned. Two books that apparently, if you will leaf through them when you go out and if you will get them signed by the authors, you will, at a first glance, realize that they seem to be very different books, but in fact, they have quite a few things in common. I would say maybe a part biography, also place writing, also cultural criticism and history, poetry, but much more than poetry. But what brings these two books together is, in fact, their total unpredictability. The moment I started reading both books, it was the same feeling I had. They are anything but predictable texts in which the author can discover not only an amazing richness of form and style, which takes the reader by surprise, but also a multitude of references to artists, creators, to other voices and other spirits who may be absent become present through the two authors' deep internal ruminations and thinking. Another thing that struck me while reading the two books is the fact that what's an idea that's underlying and the theme that's underlying the two volumes is the idea of death and loss. And I will invite the author to share a bit about this. It's not a happy thing to mention, definitely. This is not only the loss of people who are very close and dear to you, for both of you, Fiona, Shazea, but also the missingness, the absence of all these voices that I mentioned that come to inhabit the books through the voice of the romantics, in your case, Fiona, and through the voice of all the artists that come your way, and also, in a way, through the dead animals that the main character in your book is going to tend in their afterlife. So I would like to invite you to share a few things about how your projects originated and how you see your relationship with loss in the context of your work, of this particular book.
Who wants to go first, Fiona?
Well,
Do I need this as well as this?
No, if
Do
they
I
can
need
hear you
another
well enough.
microphone? No,
That's fine.
Great.
Okay.
I am going to go first because it's complicated to talk about prose. It's very complicated to talk about poetry. But the richness is in the poetry somehow, it seems to me. I don't know. Also, it's nasty to go first, so I'm going to go and do that.
Thank you.
I became a romanticist at some point about 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And as Gabriela mentioned in her very generous introduction, I have written 2 biographies of romantics, and this is my 3rd book as a romanticist, Starlight Wood. And when I proposed it, I was trying to think about culture that we take for granted, romanticism in Britain in particular, as not just a kind of cultural wallpaper, but something that is formative. In particular, I think it forms a lot of our debate about the environment, and I think that that's a very pressing issue because we live in a time of climate change, and the countryside and the rural environment is at the cutting edge of climate change. So my pitch was all about that. It was very ideas-led. And then COVID happened, and my father died. And COVID happened, and also I had proposed to walk around parts of the British countryside, kind of mapping cultural history, here we come with cultural mapping, onto quite ordinary environments in the here and now. But of course, I couldn't walk because we were in lockdown. So I spent the various lockdowns doing quite a lot of Google walks. That's to say, renovating walks I had done, or trying to peer over the Ordnance Survey maps and work out where I could do a walk, and then doing it on Google Maps and, you know, satellite view, and seeing, moving the little yellow icon of the man around and seeing what worked. I shouldn't really be telling you that, but that's the truth. And the figure of my father moved further and further into the foreground because, of course, he was dying and then he died, and also because it was he who taught me to look. It was he who drove us on long trips cross country because the family were very dispersed geographically, and it was he who taught me to try and see. And the idea of radical attention, of paying attention to what's around you, is to me absolutely primary, and for me it's absolutely primary in terms of cultural translation. That kind of, in a way, making yourself into a blank page, which we can't do, but we try, and paying absolutely profound self-effacing attention to what's other than you, what's beyond you, what you can't quite yet comprehend, what you certainly don't know, seems to me the most exciting thing one can do, and to pivot back to cultural translation, to be exactly what we're trying to do here tonight. Not that Shazea and I don't know each other, it has to be said, we do. But so that was the kind of context for Starlight Wood.
And it's also needs to be mentioned that your father was actually an artist himself, yes. And you dedicated the book to him.
Yes, and his illustrations, so rather badly reproduced, are in the book.
How about you, Shazea?
It's so interesting because in some ways there are a lot of similarities, Fiona. So I had the idea, I had started collecting the words of artists talking about their process and why they made art. I think for more than a decade, ever since I came across an exhibition at the British Museum on Ice Age art, and I saw this little statue, it was about that big, of Lion Man, and it was about 40,000 years old. And artisans had recreated and found that it would have taken 400 hours for a person or persons living in a cave and hunting and being hunted to carve this figure. And, you know, often, I don't know if you think about, you know, the worth of art sometimes and the struggle of being an artist and making a living. And something about that was so powerful to me that, you know, that 40,000 years ago, someone spent 400 hours, a person or persons, in making this figure. And so I've been very inspired by artists of all kinds, and I have to say of all, you know, from East and West and from everywhere. So I've been, you know, collecting these writings, these why people make, to sort of better understand and to feel reassured about why I make poetry, which is not really a, you know, the biggest money earner in the world. And then my brother was ill and he was dying as I was writing this book, and I became very interested in I found out about these young female taxidermists who, for whom, instead of doing sort of trophy taxidermy, they were, you know, it was these young women, and they talked about, it was sort of almost a caretaking of an animal that had died a natural or unavoidable death. And so I really began to think about, and so this figure of a taxidermist, a young woman emerged who meditates on, you know, what is left of us after we die, which is something that I had been thinking, and I have been thinking about a lot for many years. And also, I really, so I would spend a long time looking at pictures of these animals and just, you know, using the form of poetry to think about the essence of what this animal was. I think I've got very off topic now. But I think through this, it was this idea of what remains of us after we die. And then there's also, you know, there's a brother, the taxidermist mentions her brother. And so there's an underlying current of an absent brother who runs through my book as well, and who is very, very much there, even though he's not there. Mm. So I think it was the idea of that absence, and also the absent artists from the past and the present, whose words and who came into the book as characters as well.
And what I actually, because it's definitely so touching to hear and to know that you both lost somebody very dear to you during this process of writing the book. But still, reading your books, what I found very luminous and very uplifting is how you choose, both of you, to deny the silence of death and to use that to transform it into something that expands on the possibilities of our experience and experience of living and life. And regarding this, and regarding what you also mentioned earlier, Shazea, I wanted to ask both of you, how important and meaningful do you think it is to create, to make art in being human today? And also considering how both of your works, both of your books, bring in the voices of different other creatives. How does your own work intersect and find inspiration in the works of other creatives?
Yes, because I mean, in a way, it's not so much, for me anyway, it's not so much about absence, it's about presence. It's about the presence still of those voices or those personalities or those ideas, all the work they left behind. I went to that exhibition at the British Library, British Museum too, and I was absolutely blown away by it. And that's what I loved about it, was the sense that, as Shazea says, 40,000 years ago, people were making these exquisite objects. And what you had was this real charged sense of life. Not only the life of, very often they were images of animals, but not only the life of the animal, but the life of the person who made it. So that the person who made it is, in a sense, still present. I mean, it was incredibly moving and exciting, because there was this notion that Neolithic man, I mean, he was kind of, proto-human, he didn't really make art. And maybe what you were saying about, picking up what visual artists say about their practice, maybe that's what I'm doing with my biographies of romanticists. I'm trying to solve the problem of why make something, why bother, because it's the greatest act of resistance to nihilism, isn't it? It's saying yes to life. It's not saying yes to oneself, it's saying yes to life in some way. And to leave a trace would be amazing.
Yes, absolutely. And for me, I think, you know, making art and also just hearing why other artists make art and, you know, hearing about their process. For me, it's very much, and for me, writing is very much making sense of life, of the world, and my place in the world. And for me, you know, writing is my sort of most accurate and best way to think things through and to discover things that I might think about things. And I suppose it's the deepest, writing poetry for me is the deepest way of thinking about what it means to be human and, you know, what it means. And I completely agree with you about, you know, about when somebody who's a big part of your life dies, you know, there is, it's so much about their presence. It's so much about their presence, and you know, and I do want to celebrate it. I did, and I do want to celebrate that presence of the person, because they are no longer there. Doesn't mean that they are not there, sort of in us, you know, in the way we live and the way we think and the stories we tell, as well as, you know, what they might have left behind.
Yes. And don't you think there's another thing as well? I mean, maybe it doesn't work like this for you, but you know the Emily Dickinson line about tell the whole truth but tell it slant. And other people's truths and other people's things they've made tell one's own truth slant.
Yes.
It's just a great way to kind of catch sight of where you are yourself as well as where they are.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with that.
I will turn to you, Fiona, to speak a little bit about Starlight Wood. And what I just want to say very briefly, to put things into perspective, is that, as you said yourself, it's a book that comes together through the 10 walks that you decided to take to the British countryside, through the romantic British countryside, still romantic. And these walks, I think it took you a year approximately to take these walks? Yes. How did you choose the walks themselves? I know that you are very much talking about the places you're visiting on different, appointments you're having on different projects you're working on.
But I was also quite conscientious. So I thought I'd better have somewhere in Wales, I better have somewhere in Scotland, I better go to the east and the south, and I went up to the lakes. I would have gone across to the island of Ireland, but lockdown, so I didn't, and that was a huge loss for many reasons, because Irish romanticism is extraordinarily significant. It's going on at the time of the potato famine. It's a huge moment of change in Ireland. So. But maybe that would have been too big a topic for such a book. So it was a mixture of places I knew and loved and places that I felt were different enough. And then at the same time I was trying to think about a different romantic activity in each of those places. So eating, farming, settling, traveling, these different ways of being in the countryside, not just the same old. Here's a gazetteer of famous places that Wordsworth and Coleridge went to. I mean, like any kind of greetings card, calendar, coffee table book. There's no fresh thinking going on there. Yes, I know, but I don't know how to stop it rubbing. How's that? Like that? Great. I will sit very, very still. So there's a kind of conscientiousness and a kind of careful mapping going on, really.
And I must say that as a very keen walker myself, while reading your book, you made me want to trace your footsteps. And
like me, you walk with dogs.
Yes, yeah. Exactly, yes. Yeah. And you sometimes walk with your dogs too. Yes. Sometimes you remember your dogs and miss them while they're at home. fascinating to go on these walks and to take with you all these musicians, philosophers, and artists that you're bringing in there, who I must say are not only British. You're going outside of Britain, and you're mentioning even, just to give an example, and that's actually a story, a funnier story that you might want to tell. The famous French romantic Nerval, Gérard de Nerval, who walks his lobster in Paris.
Yes.
So
yes, not dogs but lobsters. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
What brought you to that?
Well, I mean, actually, it was very frustrating because Romanticism is not a British movement. It's a European movement. It's an international movement. But my publishers said, no, everybody's tired of Europe because of Brexit. We want you to stop being internationalist and just think about Britain. So I kind of was obedient, but I also slightly was disobedient. So there weren't any romantic British composers. So that was a great excuse to bring in Mendelssohn on his trips to Britain and so on. So I kept sort of getting to the edge of the island, as it were, the White Cliffs of Dover, and looking, across to the rest of the world, but not being able to quite go there.
And it's also interesting that besides the romantics themselves, what you're also bringing in is other creatives that got inspired by the romantics, like Benjamin Britten, a composer.
Yes, of course. Yes.
And the famous composer Benjamin Britten. And I must say to everybody who does not know this about Fiona Sampson, that she's a classic former concert violinist.
Former.
So she was trained as a violinist. So the former musician in you and artist in you at large is very connected to music, and I found this very, very predominantly expressed in the book.
Well, music and poetry.
Music and poetry.
It's hard to separate, isn't it? Yes.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And I will go back to Britain a bit, because another interesting thing is that each walk of yours has a title.
Yes.
And when you look at the contents and you see the titles, you can't help but be curious. And I must say that the walk I stopped at first is walk number 7, also because it's a magical number that connects us to our birthdays are 7, and the book was launched and was released on the 7th.
Yes.
And walk number 7 has the title on belonging or not belonging.
Yes.
And that's where you mentioned Benjamin Britten with an interesting reference to his famous opera, Peter Grimes.
Yes.
Where you speak about Grimes and you ponder on the relationship of the artist with the society and how Grimes was actually...
yes.
Can you tell the story a bit?
Thank you, Gabriela. So Peter Grimes is a story that was told by the Romantic poet Crabbe, and when the British poet W.H. Auden was in North America in exile from escaping the Second World War, he came across the poetry of Crabbe, fell in love with it, thought it was wonderful storytelling, and was very characteristic. So it didn't just describe English countryside, British countryside, it also described British society, small town politics, and how claustrophobic it is. Peter Grimes is the story of a fisherman who mistreats his apprentices, who are foundlings, to the point of death. We don't know whether it's accidental death or whether he's really a bully, or worse, a murderer. It's not absolutely clear. Benjamin Britten set the Peter Grimes, the poem, became his opera Peter Grimes, and showed us how we are all part of a small town. We are, and it's so apt for social media actually. We are all, part of we think we're just spectators, but we are actually a kind of judging crowd. We're not a Greek chorus, we're almost a mob, and if we're not careful, we can make wrong decisions and scapegoat people and scapegoat the wrong person. So it's a very powerful story. And Benjamin Britten was a homosexual, and at a time when it was illegal in Britain, and at the same time he was friends with the Queen and had royal, honours. He had an OBE and so on. So he was hiding in plain sight in Aldborough, which is a beautiful little town on the east coast of Suffolk, but which is a little town, and which in Crabbe's day, and Peter Grimes' day, therefore, fictional Peter Grimes' day, was extremely conventional and quite persecutory. So there's this whole, but Benjamin Britten settled there and became very famous there and brought lots of money and fame to the town. So it's a really peculiar relationship to belonging and not belonging. And it's a relationship I think probably a lot of us have with small town worlds, but particularly with small town Britain, that, not all of small town society is particularly good at mapping. It's not necessarily particularly very good at looking outwards and so on. So it's a really interesting, layered story.
Would you like to maybe share a little fragment from the book, your choice, really? And
thank you, Gabriela. I'll read just the beginning and maybe just the very end. Every story starts somewhere. From the back seat of the family car, stuck behind tractors and caravans on meandering B roads, I glimpsed a countryside I didn't know. Did I want to? I'm not sure. I was a kid, daydreaming out the window, and the trees and hedges appearing and disappearing beyond its smudged glass seemed no more than process shots I might have dreamt up. If my dad did pull in, passing lorries shook the car, and the cold tea in our plastic cups. Yet those lost laybys had a note of their own. Dust on elder leaves, cigarette butts and clover in drain covers, the smell of petrol. Occasionally, a 5-bar lay-by gate swung open, not onto nettles and rutted ground, but into a wide view that took your breath away. Then my father would pull a joking face and exclaim, "Nature's annual miracle," or "a winter wonderland." Even as a small child, I understood that such jokes masked a warning. To be moved by beauty must be to admit a kind of fallibility. So I screwed my eyes tight and tried not to see the soft groupings of trees all the way to the horizon, or the small roofs set among them like stories. Every story starts somewhere. At the centre of the visionary landscapes Samuel Palmer painted and sketched at Shoreham in Kent in the decade from 1824, a wicket gate stands ajar, a stile punctuates a fence, a path leads under the trees and through standing corn. Blossom overwhelms the painted orchards and fills the sky. Inky outlines strain at the conventions of picture surface, as if mere looking will no longer do. Start here, these images say, pressing the viewer to follow their visual logic. They draw the eye on, into a transformational experience where the usual hard-worked farmland becomes an unfamiliar paradise garden. And flowers are like stars, and stars like lamps. Romanticism isn't a cultural artifact, it's a way for thought to move. Palmer's gates open not only into Kentish orchards, but onto the wider romantic landscape. Charged with emotional energy, his oils and watercolours challenge us to see things anew. In following their glowing paths, we seem to bypass cliché and witness the freshness of the actual encounter between a romantic sensibility and its rural surroundings. It looks like transcendent, personal revelation. In fact, it's a record of shared vision and carefully elaborated ideals. There's a little ellipsis at the end of that passage. Now read on.
Thank you very much, Fiona. And I was thinking how thought moves romantically in poetry too, because that's how you are best known as a poet. Of course, recently you started working very much on biography as a genre, and this is, as I said, the third volume. But going back a little bit to your poetry, even though we are speaking about Starlight Wood tonight, I would like you to share 2 poems, and I will end with a 3rd poem, just for my colleagues to know, because we have prepared a surprise. So,
thank you, Gabriela. This is, in fact, a translation poem. I had the honor to co-translate with the poet the Estonian nobilizable Jan Kaplinsky. He died about 2 years ago. And it's called At Mukitu, which is the name of his farmhouse in the birchwoods of Estonia. And it has an allusion to Sappho, and the Sappho line, evening star, you bring back everything the bright dawn scattered. At Mukitu. What's here now when I come like Jan's sheep, like Sappho's lamb, stepping down into the valley as the bright evening light slips and pools beside a wall along the water, with the gnats and water skimmers bright and dark, falling across the stepping shoulders of the careful beasts, so quiet, so inevitable, little lamb of death, calling the poet home, although he called you first, into the clearing with the pond, the long-armed well, the barn swallows. And in the dark, the nightingales sing inexhaustibly about the forest going on forever beyond the fence rail, as poets do, singing in darkness up among the wooden beams of habitation, while the lamb comes to lie down at the threshold, comes gently to your feet, Jan. I didn't call him here. And then the other poem we picked was a poem about listening, and it's called Death. Are you listening? You are listening to the world, you think, but you hear yourself over and over, the dark tongue of world, its hidden places, under trees, beyond the lights. Darkness falling from your feet so deep you could fall through it forever. And how loud world is with night in the trees like a roost of galahs rising. The dark tongue of world rising up through you as you fall, dear self, dear lonely self, falling, silently mouthing through sound. This poem is about as if the sound of the world had been turned off and you were absolutely alone, falling just into sort of solipsism, into selfhood.
Now we will turn on the sound for the next special moment. What is bear? And what is the dancing man inside the bear skin? What sweat and what stink of tallow? Between the man and the old skin he wears, inside which the man dies and bear is reborn. Why does man put on bear? Why raise him again from darkness, raise doubt out of the dark? And who dances whom, when like a hand dipped in a wound, the fear is danced over and over? Just to give you a little bit of background into this special moment that we had with Wahab Shah, the verse belongs to our very special guest, Fiona Sampson. It's a poem inspired by a Romanian tradition, actually, bear dance. It's a Romanian tradition happening around Christmas, New Year, when men wearing bear skins dance in a ritual of chasing away the evil. And the music that we picked is a composition by British composer Sir Arnold Bax. And the composition is actually called November Woods. So from Starlight Wood and the month of November that we are in at present. And I would like to continue with Shazea Quraishi and the wonderful and very special, as I said, volume of poetry, very surprising volume of poetry, which brings together so many voices and so many forms of writing. And I thought a bit about your volume, Shazea, in the context of your journey through life and how you were born in Pakistan and then later lived in several countries. Can you tell us a little bit how old were you when you left Pakistan, where exactly in Pakistan you were born, and what was your journey after that?
Well, I left Pakistan when I was 10. My family immigrated to Canada. I was actually, we lived in Karachi. I was actually born in Multan in, I think when I was born, only about a few years ago I saw my original birth certificate, and my father was posted, I think, in a hill station or something. And it was only when I had my birth certificate translated that I saw that my name had been written down as Shazea Baby Quraishi, because the porter had written the birth certificate, and so I do have a middle name, it seems, which is Baby. So I grew up in Canada, and I also lived in Spain for 5 years, and it's really interesting. Spain, somehow I feel very at home in Spain. It feels very like Pakistan in some ways, something to do with family and food, and I think sometimes the landscape. And then I came here. So I feel very fortunate to feel very much at home, and I studied languages at university, so I did Spanish and French, and Spanish is the language that has always been sort of closest to my heart. So I have the very good fortune of feeling at home in Pakistan, in Canada, here, and in Spain, which I think when I was younger, I felt I didn't quite belong anywhere. I didn't know particularly, because when I would go back to Pakistan, people would say you're Canadian. When I was in Canada, people would say, you know, you're foreign. And it's now, as I've got older, that it's not about not belonging, but it's about belonging in so many places. So
which is actually it makes you a really lucky person, I believe. Yeah. You traveled and lived and experienced all these cultures, and without a doubt they informed your writing, and also the many forms of writing that you included in this volume, I think are very much due to this. One of them is, and I was struggling to learn the correct pronunciation of this word earlier, is the ghazal, which is, you will explain, I think much better than me what a ghazal is. But other than the ghazal, your volume has various other types of poetry that you included in it. Could you share a little bit about it?
Yes, of course. So the ghazal, I'm sure many people might be familiar with it, is one of the oldest forms of poetry. It's very popular in Persian poetry, also very much so in Urdu poetry, and actually it's been adopted. It had a renaissance sort of in the last few decades, I think, in North America as well as here. And also, I mean, actually, I know a poet who has found a Hebrew tradition already also for the ghazal. So what I really like is the form of the ghazal, which is in couplets, and it has an opening couplet, and instead of a rhyme it has a refrain, which is a word which is repeated at the end of each couplet, and it also has a rhyme before the refrain, which is also repeated. But the couplets can be completely separate, so it's a sort of weaving together of many different things, and it's been described as perhaps like shards of a mirror, or so what I really like about it as a form is that it's a way to you keep coming back to the refrain, to the words that you repeat over and over. You keep coming in from a different angle and a different story. So, I mean, as a poetic form, I found it really exciting, and it really suited me actually to work in it. And I was really interested in form actually, so for the taxidermist, most of the book is a narrative in the voice of this taxidermist, and then there are also poems that are inspired by the post-surrealist French post-surrealist group Oulipo, which is a gathering of scientists, mathematicians, and writers who embrace constraint as a form of creativity. And so the taxidermy poems use the title of the animal, and then those letters are the only letters that are used to make words for the poem. And so for me, it was very much like what a taxidermist does, which is, and I actually did a taxidermy class where I did a taxidermy on a white mouse. So there's a few white mice in it, where you take the animal apart and then you put it back together again. And so that's what the form also replicates. And there are ghazals, there are found poems that use verbatim quotes from artists, writers, filmmakers, and one of the artists who I really like is a Pakistani painter who began as a painter of miniatures, and now he does very big scale pieces, called Quraishi, who is not a relative of mine, unfortunately, and he came into the book, and he sort of kept coming back, and in the end I think the taxidermist falls in love with him. And yeah, so there are poems that are made from found material. There are anagram poems, ghazals.
Also a very interesting series of poems about dolls,
yes.
Which is very interesting.
Yes, so the good thing about poetry, I think all my sort of obsessions and interests are in there. And what really interested me about dolls, I think more than dolls, was just reading about doll makers in their making of the dolls. How for many of them, it was almost like the doll had a soul. So I was really interested from the point of view of doll makers, and Freud wrote about dolls, and the poet Rilke. So all these things come in, and I was also translating the Mexican poet Susana Chavez Castillo, who was an activist and poet, and she comes in. Some fragments of translations of her poems come in as well. She was murdered in 2011 for her protest against the killing of women in Ciudad Juarez, which is where she was from in northern Mexico, and so she was murdered for her speaking out and writing about that.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot in that volume, and I would like to invite you to read to us maybe a little bit about that would refer to the form from the beginning, maybe, of the book.
Okay, great, thanks. So there's a lot of white space in the book, and I wrote it so, my brother was dying when I was writing it, and also I wrote a lot of it during the first lockdown, so lockdown was also a thing, and I wrote quite a lot of it in my shed, in the garden. So, you know, there's something about loss. There's a lot of silence, and so in the book there's a lot of white space as well. Day 1. She wakes to birdsong, sun slats on the floor. Suitcase by the door spills clothes, quiet of the house a cocoon, a skin. At the table she waits for the mouse to thaw, scalpel, tweezers, calipers, pins, pipe cleaners, wire, scissors, needle, thread, straw. Begins, taking apart, putting together. A white mouse, a feeder mouse. Soft drift of white, his modest truth disarms me. Forehead, ears, feet, mouth, a dim rose with teeth. I admire this raw meat of us, this ease. Her hands intent, precise, thinking. Miracle how living works, stops. Careful labor to preserve, restore what? Limbo? No. Past in present, perhaps. An imprint, a three-dimensional holding of memory? No. Of once being. She once heard someone say, this is craft, it lacks edge, advantage, power, urgency, force. Gets up to shift thoughts. She remembers swimming in a river by her brother's house, the current cold, insistent. How once she let it carry her too far before climbing the high bank to walk back over pine needles, hard earth, stones. How he watched from a window until he saw her red swimsuit flickering through the trees. Day 3. Morning, a suggestion of heat. At the river, she undresses on the grassy bank, slips into the thrilled water. Oh, to be here. Air, water, world against skin. Everywhere, green, blue, living things living. Walking back, she meets the painter of miniatures. His coloring, planes of his face, neat beard, remind her of her brother, feel like home. We made our own brushes with squirrel hair. Our teacher used to say, with bad weapons, you cannot fight. Lahore is a city of gardens, so there are many squirrels. You go with apples and they come. Also, the gardeners know you, so when a squirrel dies, they bring it. First, take the straw of a pigeon feather, clean it. Take squirrel hair and pass it through the hole. Clean bamboo for the stick. Tie it with thread. That's the kalam. There was a strict discipline, leaving shoes outside the studio, sitting cross-legged on the floor for hours on end, holding your breath while painting, as if there was a defined outline and we had to accept the challenge of staying within its confines.
Thank you. I must share with our audience that while we were discussing and thinking of what poems to choose, you decided to read these fragments from the beginning of the book. But what struck me was in fact the poem with which the volume ends, which has a very interesting title. The title of the poem that concludes the book is How It Begins. And this is, in fact, the poem that, when I was talking to Shazea about it, and I was thinking that it's probably the poem that I most felt close to my heart while reading. And I was thinking of reading it. I ended up realizing that this was actually very personal to you. Would you like to share the story behind it and maybe also read it?
Oh, thank you. Yes, so this, I was commissioned to respond to the painting by Gustav Klimt, The Kiss, and with a poem, and I was trying to find a way to respond to the painting without talking about the painting. And so I'm sure many of you know it. So it's two lovers who are entwined. And actually, as I was sort of finishing the poem for the commission, my brother was dying. And he lived in Montreal, so I would go quite often, and I would see him and his wife, and they'd only been married a few years, I think. They'd been together 3 years. They'd been married for 1 year when he died. And they became the lovers. The figure of the lovers for me was very much when I would just see her, the way that she would look at him and he would look at her. And so I was writing this poem, and I think I was also trying to work through something. I didn't know what the poem would be. And then, Fiona, I don't know if you find that, but I find that, and because it was a commission, I wanted to do justice to it. And I think I worked out, I spent about probably 90 hours on this poem, and the things that came into the poem were you know, things that were going on for me in my life. I went with my son to the National History, the Museum of Natural History, and saw an exhibition of whales. And so I was standing with him, and we were standing inside this case that held the bones of the whale that swam down the Thames. And I remember that happening, and I realized that I had gone to see the whale when it was dying in the Thames. It had swum upriver, and I realized that I was pregnant with my son, who I was then standing with, and I was trying to talk to him also about death and what remains of us. And so the whale swam into the poem, and it was right up till the end. Someone was coming to record a voiceover of me reading the poem, and I still hadn't found the end of the poem, and I think it was about an hour before he arrived. The ending came to me, and so for me the poem is very much sort of trying to find, I really wanted to find sort of in the loss some consolation perhaps, and something of the presence as well that you talked about, Fiona. Shall I read it now?
Yes.
And for a poem that took 92 hours, it's really very small. It's very short. There are two elegies at the end of the book. How it begins. A man and a woman press close as flowers press to the pages of a book. Her pale foot slips from its sandal in the vaulted space of a kiss, and the way his hands hold her face is the way leaves hold a bud before it flowers. Now this, a woman alone in a crowd watches a strong brown river struggle to hold the whale that swam down the city's glittering throat, and the air presses, heavy as grief, against her enormous softness. And if a woman and a boy stand before a glass coffin that holds the bones of a northern bottlenose whale, the softness of his hands will be enormous as she tells him how a story that began with a kiss, despite the enormous hole at its heart, can hold a boy, and a river that began with rainwater or snowmelt can briefly hold a whale before letting it go, to spill from its mouth into the ocean stories of whales and boys and all it has known.
It's really a poem, I believe, that can touch the reader every time he or she reads it.
Thank you.
Now that you read it again, it had the same effect on me. And what I find amazing about your work is not only the power of your poetry, but also the power of your translation. And you mentioned the poet that you translated. we have chosen together a poem that Shazea translated by Susana Chavez Castillo, called In the Branches of Your Voice. A wonderful translation which is so sensitive. I will just read the English version of it, if you don't mind. It was translated from Spanish. Light, unquestioning, keeps vigil and your eyes open forever. I'm speaking of the heart faced with death in the branches of your voice, with one lip of earth and another of night, with a heart of dust and another of wind. I'm speaking of this love, this navigating through fog, this love, this love. Each silence brings us to the word that reflects us. Your loneliness takes shape within my body and stars crumble in your absent gaze. Sometimes I find you in a face you never had, in a ghostly form you didn't deserve, and silence looks up at me. This time we return at night. Trees hold on to their birds, and tiredness extends its tongue to sing in our ears. Night arrived in our heart, and your eyes closed as the world entered. And yet, somehow, we all knew, and something now breaks memory in two. Something breaks in two the woman who calms her soul before entering her narrow bed, and the night, like a glass that falls from the hand of a frightened child, breaks in two. Something already broken breaks in two. It's a beautiful translation. Other than Susana Chavez Castillo, what other authors did you translate, and what other authors are you planning to translate?
At the moment, I'm planning to translate. Her books have been published in an ebook, but they haven't been published in book form. So I'm working on a bilingual publication of her poems translated by me, and also in Spanish. So that's what I'm working on for now. In my next book, actually, it's interesting you mentioned Sappho in that poem. In my next book, I'm writing towards and in conversation with Sappho, with the 7th century poet and musician Sappho, who I think, can it be said, invented the lyric. You know, she wrote for the lyre. So I'm reading lots of different translations of Sappho, and considering that her fragments are, sometimes there are just a few words. Depending on the translator, they're so different. So I'm sort of in that as well at the moment.
Thank you very much, Shazea. I think we will conclude. We will get close to concluding our conversation. And if you don't mind, I think it would actually be really nice if you read the ghazal yourself.
Oh,
the
okay.
ghazal with rain and birds, which will be followed by a very special moment.
What page is it on? Oh, I found
22.
it. 22. Thanks. So there's a ghazal singer. There's an artist colony, which is where the book is set, and there's a ghazal singer. My beloved is weather. She is cloud, rain shower, a day dawning generous, bright with birds. Rain is beginning and rain is ending, longed for and sudden, as heavy, as light as birds. Beauty's a gift and beauty's a cage, a thunder of wing beats, a day and a night of birds. Streets freshly watered, a telephone line is strung as if pearled with white after white after white bird. The breeze brings a name woven with flowers, bestows on the trees a blessing, a first light of birds. Come to the river, to its bed full of stones. Come rest on the green of its bank, a delight for birds. What's in a name? Ava means voice, melody, song, and song is the birthright of birds.
Thank you very much, Shazea. And this brings me to the concluding part of our journey, for which I would like to introduce our third special guest for tonight. Renowned choreographer and performing artist Wahab Shah, who you have seen earlier, received acting and professional dance training in Australia, during which time he also launched the Wahab Shah Dance Company, which is a strong promoter of traditional Pakistani arts and culture. His dance performances are known for their high energy, fluid movements, and innovative choreography, and his performances have received standing ovations in countries like the USA, UAE, Spain, Turkey, Norway, or the Netherlands, to name but a few. Please join me in welcoming Wahab Shah. Wahab, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I would like to ask you, just before you introduce the last bit of our event tonight, your choreography and your dance sits very much at the intersection between contemporary dance and Sufi dance. And I would like you to explain where you take inspiration from mostly, and to also share with us a little bit about what Sufi dance is all about.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much to both the authors, Shazea, Fiona, and Gabriela. In terms of where I take my inspiration from, or what I understand, what I've learned, it's all like a dream now. It all seems like as if nothing was ever learned, but everything is a learning. And yes, for the lack of words, you can say, or for the understanding of what exists around me. And now I can say that. Prior to that, I was regarded as a contemporary trained dancer from Sydney. And you learn a certain technique and how to use that technique to tell stories. And then as you're telling stories, you find out there is so many people who've got a similar technique. So how do you introduce, or how do you think of your own way of movement, of your own technique? So there is no hard and fast rule to it. Now I think my dance has become so diluted, you would say, so spontaneous, you can say, that it doesn't necessarily have a style as such. It's just notion, it's just movement, it's just motion. I take inspiration from gazillion things. A lot of people in our part of the world think that, know that about me, that I am I like kind of going out there, looking at fabric, the sense, the sound, the smell of the bazaars, of the spaces that I go into, that entire energy of spaces and people and cluster of people and traffic and bazaar, spices, everything is that all dance to me. Every time I look at anything, every time I experience anything, it just, the senses kind of move to it. It may sound really vague, but I think that's what life is. We try and hardline border it with certain labels that we've been given, we've grown up with, we understand, and sometimes being vague is just not a good answer. But I guess that's the reason I dance, is because I don't have the answers through the words. So I just dance to express. I try and be who I am. I am sometimes an extremely lazy person, and sometimes I'm the most driven person. Sometimes I am bound to understand a certain technique, and I understand where is it coming from, where is it coming from? How do I get it? How do I get it to such perfection? And then sometimes I just let it go. So it's all in the middle of everything. Now, in terms of dhamal, what dhamal is, or what my understanding of dhamal is, you'll always get a different answer for this style, as you would say. For me, dhamal is the ecstasy. It's the union between you and your belief and your believer. Who do you believe in? What do you believe in? There's a union between the physical and the spiritual. And in between the union, there is a space where you exist as a spiritual being, and the physical is just kind of showing a certain technique that it's learned, that it's mastered, that it's it is present for everybody else to enjoy. But the spiritual has to transcend somewhere else, and that translates into the dhamal. So in our part of the world, Pakistan, India, the Turkey, Iraq, Iran, all of these places, when you're going through a certain phase or a period or a space, you go to these spiritual guiders, these mentors, you would call them the Sufis, and you try and spiritually connect to them and speak to them. Now, it's not necessary that you speak to them with words. So when you speak to them, your spirit is speaking to them. Now, around you, there's a certain amount of music, depending on which part of the region you're from. If you're from our part, we predominantly use dhol, we use nagada. These are traditional instruments, and there's a proper orchestral arrangements that are played on those shrines. And so when that happens, there's a second layer that is coming up, and you have to let go of it. And I believe the West is kind of starting to experience it a lot more through social media, through this the immediate connections that we have through traveling and all that. So West is trying to experience it, or is starting to experience the spiritual side of those things a lot more now as opposed to before. So for us, it's like, this is what we do. You feel sad, you feel like, nothing is being done. Life is not going your way. You'll go to the Sufi shrine, you'll just say, I don't know, I don't care, just I need to do this. And you just get up and you dhamal. Now, how do I preserve, or how do I bring that to you guys, is because right now it is not a Sufi shrine, it is a stage. You guys are an audience. So therefore, I have to try and somewhat mimic, somewhat try and take you guys on a journey. I don't know if I will, if I may not, but here is a little bit of dhamal. Before the dhamal, I'm going to be doing a small bits of our cultural provincial dances, and then it'll flow into dhamal. I hope you guys enjoy it. Thank you.
Okay, Gabriela, do you want to say something? Would you like to say something?
I would just like to say, to invite everyone to invite everyone to not forget to check the books, buy the books, get them signed by their authors, and to join us all in the lobby when we finish for a cup of tea and a chat.
Okay, and before we go outside in the atrium for book signing or tea, coffee, as Wahab, just to let you know that Wahab was in Pakistan and he especially came for this event just 2 days ago. So please put your hands together for his effort and every contribution that he has done. And as he mentioned that this performance is called Dhamal, and that's usually taking place at the Sufi shrines, and you go into transcend, and then in another world. And the word he used, let it go. I know so far everyone has been really patiently, quietly listening to every conversation, which is appreciated. Thank you very much. But now time to let it go. So anyone, because the rhythm and the beat will take you to that journey, and I would like everyone to be part of that journey and join us on that journey, whether on stage or off stage, because it's is part of the process, the whole thing, and the whole dhamal, because it picks up gradually, and towards the end, you get the upbeat notes and really high pitch, and then you will automatically feel that either you are clapping. So please feel free to clap. Please feel free to dance here, there, on stage, join us. So please don't be shy. It's the time to let it go. So I'll give the stage to Wahab Shah. Please put your hands together again.
Keeping the contrast in the whispers, so the foreground becomes the reason. Without either, neither is complete. Focusing on now, renewing the invented, uniting the distant, fortifying the bond, simplifying the need, developing the flavor, glorifying the deed, recognizing the self, all with love, with fragrance and blessings. तुखम सात रंगो जुबां सब दिलां दे सौदे ने साईं फकीर रब दा जोगी मनी मन्नत मनी महर मनी लोगी चल बुलिया चल ओथे चलिए जिथे सारे अन्ने ना कोई साडी जात पहचाने ना कोई सानू मन्ने night be your light. May day be your way. O my Lord, O my God, make me love.